This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has rejected analysis suggesting most households would be worse off within 5 years and has said she's confident she can cut 10,000 civil service jobs to reduce spending. Tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets in Turkey in protest over the arrest of President Erdogan's main rival, Istanbul's mayor, despite demonstrations being banned. And Pope Francis has been discharged from hospital and appeared on a public balcony at Rome's Gemelli Hospital to bless the crowd. Hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with barrister and political commentator Rupert Myers and former Conservative Special Advisor Anita Boateng. Welcome both.
Thank you.
Well, let's see what is on some of those front pages now. Well, on the front page of the Metro, the Prime Minister has issued an ultimatum for councils to show how many potholes they're fixing in a new crackdown. The education sector is facing its biggest squeeze in a generation ahead of the Chancellor's spring statement. That's according to the Eye. Rachel Reeves' plans are also on the front of the Mirror. She's set to cut 10,000 civil service jobs in her announcement this Wednesday. While the Times says the Chancellor's plans to cut tens of thousands of civil servants could lead to war with the trade unions. The fallout from Trump's tariff threats continues to cause havoc on Wall Street. That story leads the Financial Times. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer has been warned not to appease Donald Trump as he considers reducing a major tax on U.S. tech giants. That story's in The Guardian. The Mirror reports Christine Keeler's son says he will ask for a royal pardon to clear his mother's name more than 60 years after she was jailed for perjury. The chief executive of the National Grid has claimed Heathrow Airport had enough power to avoid shutting down during Friday, according to The Telegraph. And there's good news for sun lovers, with The Star reporting that Wednesday's predicted temperature could reach 20 degrees, making March the hottest since 1910. Maybe. We're joined tonight by Rupert Myers and Anita Boateng. Thank you both so much for being with us. Obviously, the spring statement in one way or another on many of the front pages. Let's start with the Times there. At the bottom, Chancellor risks a war with unions over spending cuts. Rupert, why don't you start us with that one?
Yeah, well, the weather might not be getting hotter for a few days, but for the Chancellor, it's already pretty hot. Ministers are drawing up plans to axe somewhere between. Different newspapers have different estimates. The Times says maybe 50,000 jobs. Now, of course, the public sector has grown by some 25% over the last 25 years. Public sector productivity has not risen in line with private sector productivity, but the unions are extremely concerned and angry at the cuts and the impact that they may have. There's talk in the newspaper here of cutting school spending by £500 million and ending universal free meals for infants. So these are difficult choices. For people on the right, they may be wondering why it is that it's a Labour government that's been doing this rather than the Conservatives before them. For voters on the left, they may be wondering what was the purpose of this Labour government if they're going to come in and take such swingeing cuts to the heart of public sector spending.
Anita?
Definitely. The fact that the unions are not going to take this lying down is something that we should continue to watch, because obviously this is the Public and Commercials Services Union, which is effectively the kind of public sector trade union. But this is a sign of dynamics to come. There is no doubt in my mind that when it comes to the pay deals that will be done between unions and between the government, the unions are going to be disappointed. So the question is, do you end up in endless strikes? And if that happens, then the real promise that the public thought they were going to get off the back of the election then becomes seriously in doubt. Because not only do you have a government that is cutting welfare, potentially cutting back on public services, you also have the state not working. And that could be a really fatal cocktail for the Prime Minister.
And it seems like it's going to be felt across all sectors. If we look at the Eye, the front page there, the headline, education. They're saying education braces for worst squeeze in a generation, as Reeves, of course, admits cuts are coming. Ruben.
Yeah, I mean, they're talking about 15% administrative cuts to all departments. The Eye thinks it's going to be 10,000 jobs, a fifth of the number that the Times does that are being axed. Obviously, this is shocking For people who voted for a government that was going to come in and they thought deliver for public services, to see them having to make huge cuts to the education budget. But, of course, this government is trying to do, as we understand it, the hard work at the beginning of its term in order to hopefully try and turn the corner by the end of it. But whether it can carry its support until then, if it's cutting these sorts of areas, education for any Labour voter is going to be an area where they think it's almost unthinkable to start to making cuts.
Well, I'm a little cynical about this little piece.
Okay.
I think that this is clearly, when the Department for Education starts saying, having been in government, oh, well, you want us to find £500 million of savings, then let's pick the most attractive things that no government would ever want to do and go, well, that means we have to take food from children. So I think there's a little bit of a negotiation expectation management, and I think the government has been doing that all along. We had this week the announcement around welfare changes, and there was this briefing that actually they were going to freeze all payments of people on disabilities. That turned out not to be the case. I'm not surprised, having been a DWP special advisor. That is a very tough thing to do. So I think there's a little bit of that going on, a bit of ankle, a bit of negotiation going on to make sure that when it lands on Wednesday, people go, oh, that's not so bad.
So can I ask, do you think that this is the government rolling the pitch to make it easier to do less drastic things, or the Education Department kicking its toys out of the pram and threatening?
I think they both have reasons to be dramatic about what may be coming, which then ends up being not quite as dramatic.
Do you think the public will feel that, you know, so many things have happened? Of course, this government says they inherited a situation from the Conservatives, but then a lot of international factors have played a role as well. Do you think the public, I don't know, swallow the bitter pill a bit more easily?
I actually think there's a risk of the reverse. There's a risk that the government looks distracted by what's happening on the other side of the pond. I think it's definitely helped, for instance, Starmer's approval ratings, that he's been strong and visible in Europe. But British people, especially with the economy where it is now, you could end up in a sort of charity begins at home, where is the focus on what's happening in the UK, especially if decisions like this are resulting in public services not improving.
But I'm thinking also of issues like, you know, having to increase defence spending, Rupert.
Yeah, well, generally, people vote on their own economic circumstances. I mean, they may accept if you stop them in the street and say, do we need to increase defence spending? They may say yes, but ultimately, come the next election, they're going to vote for a party that's going to make them and their families better off. And if their kids' school isn't getting the same funding, if local, you know, government departments aren't helping them, then how many tanks we have on the battlefield is not going to be the thing they vote for in the ballot box.
OK. And then there's military war and then trade wars as well. If we go to the Telegraph front page there, Reeves ready to offer the US a £700 million tax break to avoid a trade war. Talk us through this one, please.
My heart goes out to Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, because effectively this is the Liberal Democrats' kind of argument. They've been arguing for an increase in the digital services tax, which is this tax that actually was agreed on the OECD across lots of different countries to increase its taxes on global giants. And the UK has been implementing it, and there is some signs that the US is certainly going to expect that to be rolled back. And so they have been pushing quite hard for the government to basically be clear about whether they're going to do anything about this tax. And Reeves was circumspect when she was out on media today, and it's kind of led to some of this expectation that she's actually going to roll over on this. I don't actually have any inside information about whether that's going to happen or not, but it's nevertheless quite significant that it's being seen as the UK potentially rolling over.
Rupert.
Well, we're being bullied. The criticism, the quote says here, from Washington is based on the view that the tax unfairly targets American businesses as they dominate the global tech sector. What else are we supposed to do? If we want to implement taxes in order to raise revenue, we need to do that. Look at the cuts we've just been discussing. We're having to kowtow to a government in America that is prepared to push its allies and neighbours around. The government is in a hard place, and they're not doing a terrible job of negotiating the fine balance between standing up for the UK's interests and not completely ditching relations with our biggest strategic partner.
Yeah. Of course, it's not just between countries, because if we look at the front page of the Financial Times, the headline there, Trump tariff tremors shatter Wall Street faith in American exceptionalism, because this is being felt across the globe, but obviously in the US itself as well.
Yeah. And there's a lot of speculation that actually a lot of the tariff tantrum, which is what I'm describing it as, not quite a tremor, is actually a lot of anxiety within the Trump camp about the economy. So the Fed has cut growth projections already. Inflation was expected to be at 2.5 by the end of the year. It's going to be 2.7. This is not looking good for the US economy. When you consider the size of their national debt, that's the reason why Doge is running rampant and throwing out, printers and everything in the quest to save money. So I actually think that this is quite a significant story that may well shape a lot of the conversations we were just having about, new taxes, conversations about tariffs, conversations about Ukraine. All of it comes down to that anxiety and that realisation that Joe Biden lost the election because of the economy. And if that continues to be a problem, the US continues to become more difficult and more unpredictable.
This story gives me some hope. The one thing that's going to rein Donald Trump's eccentric and very ambitious approach to government in is his own domestic markets and the people around him who are very worried about the fall of the dollar and the stock market. The quote here is about the tremendous amount of uncertainty caused by executive orders. If Wall Street can't get Donald Trump to pay attention, nobody can.
OK, but it does show, though, that we will always feel, when they say Europe, if the US sneezes, we catch a cold, it's going to, whatever happens in the US, we will always keep on feeling the repercussions.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that in some ways, a US is prepared to kind of use its weight and throw its weight around. It almost just serves to emphasise the amount that it matters, that the US matters. And even though, by the time of the next UK government election, it could be Donald Trump will presumably be out of power, the repercussions of the moving of political consensus in the US could be profound for a very long time to come. We can see, for instance, what happened with tariffs. Like, tariffs were a thing that were very much a Trump obsession. Biden kept a lot of those tariffs in place.
Anita, Rupert, stay with us. We'll look at more of the headlines, including Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has called a snap election. Stay with us.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We start with breaking news.
I am Anna Botting.
It's been quite some day.
The golden age of America begins right now.
A long-awaited ceasefire is now underway.
First question, Sky News.
Congratulations, this is a huge moment.
Describe this feeling, it's incredible.
Now to California.
The Democratic mayor of Los Angeles cut the fire department budget.
Do you owe citizens an apology? Have you nothing to say today?
Jane Secker, Sky News. Would you like to respond to us now?
I've never seen anything like this.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
In principle, would you agree to do that?
Criticism of you, the president, is banned. How is this a fair election?
Historic day here today.
The cameras are poised here, there, everywhere, waiting to see what the president might do next.
I gave you the A+ treatment. Thank you. Thank you all.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world.
I'm Deborah Hames, Sky Security and Defence Editor. I've covered Russia's full-scale war since it began, witnessing the terror and the trauma.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
Sky News, get the full story first.
I'm Martha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
Sky News, get the full story first, free, wherever you get your news.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's futures.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club.
4 more years!
Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me now, Rupert Myers and Anita Boateng. OK, Rupert, let's start with this story in The Times.
Yes, back to The Times.
Front page. Let's just bring it up, I think, and go through the headline. Asylum seekers to remain in hotels for years, Treasury admits. I mean, obviously, the whole issue of housing asylum seekers in hotels and the length that many of them stay in for very controversial. What's this about?
Well, we were talking before about the cuts the government's going to have to make, and this story flies right in the face of that for anyone picking up a newspaper in the morning, because the Treasury believes that global instability means that it's inevitable that legal migrants will continue to come to the UK, which the Treasury clearly accepting that Keir Starmer isn't going to be able to smash the gangs as he promised. The cost to taxpayers of each asylum seeker has increased from 17 to 41,000 a year between 2020 and 2024. There are 38,000 of them in hotels at a cost of £5.5 million a day, and the Treasury is admitting that they think that's going to be the case for years to come. So this is very, very difficult stuff, very difficult for voters to accept, very difficult to see an obvious solution to this problem. So while people's kids are having their school funding cut in the future, this is going to continue to be the case, and it's going to turn up their temperature on politics and possibly open up greater ground for parties like Reform to make some capital.
Anita?
I mean, I think it's worth reiterating that Rupert point. £5.5 million every single day. Yeah. That is political kryptonite for this government. And actually, it's worth dwelling on exactly how this came about. This is Treasury brain. So Treasury has come up with this new Office for Value for Money, which was founded basically in September 2024 to make sure they could find new ways of saving money. And what they do is they tend to look at things that waste money and write reports about them, which then get reported on in the Times. And this is really revealing, not just because of the situation we find ourselves in right now, where the government's saying, oh, sorry, children, we can't fund your lunches, but we can fund £5.5 million every day to spend on asylum hotels. And also, it really flies in the face of Keir Starmer's specific pledge around the election, which is to end asylum hotels, which was always a sort of impossible pledge that really didn't mean anything because there was no plan to do so, except, by the way, we're going to spend some more money processing asylum seekers, as if the previous government hadn't thought of that. But this really speaks to the political problem that Labour faces and the reason why there's so much anxiety in Number 10, despite the size of the majority, which is that fundamentally they have a problem around delivery. And they know that if they can't get things like this under control, there is a real risk that the popular surge that has come across a lot of the Western world will come to the UK and will sweep out Labour. And this is a real vulnerability to theirs, and there's not much of a plan to tackle it.
OK. Let's move on to another story, front page of the Daily Telegraph. Trump and Putin at odds ahead of new Ukraine peace talks. Now, the Ukraine peace talks start on Monday in Saudi Arabia. Interestingly, of course, we know that Trump has always said he was going to solve it in a day. Maybe it hasn't quite taken a day, but he's certainly pushing ahead. But, Rupert, Vladimir Putin putting the brakes here a little bit.
Yeah, what are we on, day 65 or something of that one-day peace deal? We know that there was a temporary agreement in respect of infrastructure bombing. We know that Moscow broke that immediately. There are going to be talks in the future. Saudi Arabia, hopefully, they say, paving the way to a full-on ceasefire. But the Kremlin's playing down expectations because they've still got this entirely maximalist strategy. I don't think that Putin or the Kremlin have made a single concession in terms of what they want as the outcome of these negotiations. And I just don't see Trump getting anywhere. He came into this without a plan. He abandoned his cards by essentially giving away Ukraine's position right at the outset. And now he's just struggling on with Russia demanding that they retain parts of Ukraine and that Ukraine essentially becomes a state that can't join NATO and can't join the European Union. I don't see this going forward. I'm very pessimistic about it. And it's not the art of the deal. It's a complete catastrophe.
What have you made of Trump's handling of this, Anita?
Well, I think that in some ways the US doesn't have cards, because if Trump's ultimate objective is to stop spending money today on the Ukrainian war. And once that's your ultimate objective, and everyone knows that's your ultimate objective, there's almost nothing that can't be asked for in pursuit of that objective. And I think that Trump, whether the question of whether that's the right objective or not, even in trying to do that, the way that he has revealed all of his cards and said, would everyone like to have a gander? And look, your cards look better than mine, but let's still play. I think that has seriously damaged hope and confidence in the UK.
Okay, we've got 45 seconds left, so let's go to the FT, because Mark Carney has now set an election date. This is so interesting, isn't it, Rupert? Obviously, we all know who he is, because he was the former governor of the Bank of England. He's been really assertive, hasn't he?
He's been assertive. He's hit the ground running. He's got a great track record, working in this country, and he's got a great international presence. He looks like a grown-up in the room. It doesn't hurt that he just recorded a fantastically entertaining video with Mike Myers, no relation, which he put out on social media about Canada remaining Canada. He's clearly got a very slick campaign behind him. He's optimistic that a short election will work to his benefit.
And the election, April 28th, so he wants the country behind him.
Yeah, I think it's a smart decision to go for a snap election when he hasn't had the chance to make enemies yet.
OK. Rupert, Anita, we'll leave it there for now. I'll see you in the next hour. And now let's take a quick look at the weather.